Today, we're going to define what archaeology is, how it came to be, what we do, and what it means to other people. For starters, many archaeologists consider themselves as part of the broader discipline of anthropology. Anthropology, in the most general sense, is a study of humanity with anthro meaning human and ology meaning the study of. In order to get a holistic understanding of humanity, anthropology is divided into four primary subfields. There is physical, which is sometimes known as biological anthropology, which studies human skeletal variation and evolution. Next, we have cultural anthropology, which studies contemporary cultures in a variety of contexts. Linguistic anthropology is kind of like cultural anthropology, but focuses on how language shapes or changes culture. Finally, we have archaeology, what we are primarily interested in, which seeks to understand past societies through the materials that they have left behind called artifacts. All of these subfields complement one another and work with other disciplines like geology, biology, sociology, geography, and more to help us paint the most vivid picture of our human experience, from the beginning to the present. Archaeologists operate in a time frame much larger than the period studied by historians. Conventional historical sources begin only with the introduction of written records around 3000 BCE in Western Asia and much later in other parts of the world. The practice of archaeology is rather like a science. Archaeology is just as much about the analytical concepts of the archaeologist as the instruments in the laboratory. Because of this, we apply the steps of the scientific method in many of our research endeavors. After all, we are a social science. The history of archaeology is therefore, in the first instance, a history of ideas, of theory, of ways of looking at the past. Next, it is a history of developing research methods, employing those ideas, and investigating those questions. And only thirdly is it a history of actual discoveries. During the revival of learning in Europe known as the Renaissance, which took place during the 14th to 17th centuries, princes and people of refinement began to form cabinets of curiosities, which are also sometimes called curio cabinets. Some of you may have seen these pieces, perhaps in a grandparent's home or a shop, as they are pieces of furniture meant to display high-value items. This drive to collect items was founded by antiquarian ideology, which is generalized by solely collecting materials for the esteem it brought to the possessor. Antiquarians were thinking about things and admired them for their rarity. In the 18th century, researchers initiated excavation of some of the most prominent sites. The Roman city of Pompeii in Italy was one of the first of these. Pompeii lies in the shadow of Mount Vesuvius in Italy. When the volcano erupted in 79 CE, the entire city was buried and perfectly preserved in ash, all but forgotten until excavations began in the mid-18th century. Such spectacular discoveries generated huge interest in the past and greatly influenced the arts. The credit for conducting what has been called the first scientific excavation in the history of archaeology traditionally goes to Thomas Jefferson, who in 1784 dug a trench or section across a burial mound on his property in Virginia. Jefferson's work marks the beginning of the end of the speculative phase. Jefferson was ahead of his time. His sound approach, logical deduction from carefully excavated evidence, in many ways is the basis of modern archaeology, was not taken up by any of his immediate successors. In this way, he went beyond antiquarianism, meaning he was simply not thinking about things, but he was thinking from things. What do these artifacts tell us about the culture who made them? It wasn't until the middle of the 19th century that the discipline of archaeology became truly established. The study of the stratification of rocks established principles that were to be the basis of archaeological excavation, as foreshadowed by Jefferson. This was the principle of uniformitarianism, that geologically ancient conditions were in essence similar to or uniform with those of our own time. This was an important tool as we are able to see geologically what type of environment peoples may have lived in and perhaps how that influenced their culture. Not only that, but ideologies such as burying your dead conform to this model as well. Another important contribution was the three-age system. The scholar C.J. Thompson proposed that prehistoric artifacts could be divided into those coming from a Stone Age, a Bronze Age, and an Iron Age. and this classification was soon found useful by scholars. As scholars began going further back in time, they further segmented the Stone Age into the Paleolithic and Neolithic. Lithic translates to stone, so the Paleolithic is also known as the Old Stone Age and comprises all of the stone technology up until around 12,000 years ago. The Neolithic, or New Stone Age, recognizes the change in stone technology in response to the adoption of agriculture. There are, of course, many more divisions, but those will suit us for today. Archaeology is further subdivided into a variety of specializations. Today we have osteoarchaeology, which focuses on human skeletal remains, ethnoarchaeology, which focuses on understanding present-day cultures to make inferences about the past, zooarchaeology studies animal remains and how they are related to past humans, prehistoric archaeology focuses on populations before the written record, while historic archaeology focuses on after. These are only a few of the many different avenues of archaeological investigation. However, it was only in the late 19th century that a sound methodology of scientific excavation began to be generally adopted. From that time, some major figures stand out, who in their various ways have helped create the modern field methods we use today, such as Sir William Flinders Petrie, Sir Mortimer Wheeler, Dorothy Garrod, Julio Tello, and Alfred Kidder. There now ensued a period lasting till about 1960 that has been described as the classificatory historical period. Its central concern was chronology. In other words, at what time did certain sites and artifacts fit into the human story? Keyword being when. W.C. McKern devised what became known as the Midwestern taxonomic system, which correlated artifact sequences in the Midwest by identifying similarities between artifact collections. This was crucial as it helped us place particular cultures in space and time. Contributing to this, Gordon V. Childe, influenced by Marxist ideas and relatively recent Marxist revolution in Russia, proposed the Neolithic Revolution we mentioned earlier. This first took place in the Near East, which gave rise to the development of farming. Later, an urban revolution would lead to the first towns and cities. In 1949, American chemist Willard Libby announced his invention of radiocarbon dating, which is a mainstay of archaeological investigation today. The implications were clear. Here, at last, archaeologists might have a means of directly determining the age of undated sites and finds anywhere in the world without complicated cross-cultural comparisons. Further adding to archaeology's foundation, the anthropologist Julian Stewart's notion of cultural ecology highlighted the fact that cultures do not interact simply with each other, but with the environment as well. The 1960s mark a turning point in the development of archaeology. The fundamental cause for dissatisfaction with the traditional archaeology was that it never really seemed to explain anything or answer the why questions. A group of younger archaeologists, led by the famous Louis Binford, set out to offer a new approach to the problems of archaeological interpretation, which soon was dubbed the New Archaeology, or processual archaeology. This framework introduced the rigors of the scientific method into archaeological praxis and is characterized by the answering of hypotheses, much like we do in other scientific fields. However, post-processual archaeological approaches, which deal with interesting and difficult questions, have been used in more recent times and are more focused on the human experience rather than proving or disproving hypotheses. The emphasis has been upon the use of a variety of personal and often humanistic insights to develop a range of different fields and interests. One important post-processual approach is the inclusion of oral histories and descendant community insight into the archaeological process and research design. Archaeology cannot avoid being caught up and influenced by the issues of the day, social and political as well as intellectual. An example is the influence of feminist thinking and the growth of feminist archaeology. Today, archaeology, once largely comprised of white, upper-class, European, or North American males, has changed. Many active archaeologists are women. Many nationalities are represented across the globe. And, perhaps most importantly, indigenous archaeologists are playing an increasing role. This is a primary emphasis in American archaeology, where the majority of practitioners are rarely dealing with cultures that they are related to. We can appreciate this difference if we take a moment to consider British archaeology, where, more times than not, those who are digging are typically descended in one way or another from the culture they are digging up. While where we as humans come from is something that can pique anyone's interest, and archaeology is certainly a tool to help satiate that interest, it's important to consider how archaeology impacts those who are related to the culture we are interested in.